Hello and welcome to Tradition and Truth. My name is Walker. I really enjoy coffee, theology, philosophy, and existential questions. So we're going to drink some coffee and we're going to watch a video and debunk it. Today we're going to be diving into a series of claims set by a Protestant speaker known as the Bible in Context. He argues against the Church Fathers, saying they were not Catholic, that they denied the primacy of Peter, and him being the Bishop of Rome. And we're going to address all of these with detailed quotes, historical references, and authoritative references. This is to demonstrate the consistency of the Catholic doctrine from the very beginning till now. His claims are widely cherry-picked and do not provide full context. And that's typical with a lot of Protestants, is that they cherry-pick information to fit their narrative.
Let me let them know your name. Let me let them know.
Contrary to what Catholics have been told, the early church fathers and writers were not Catholic. Many of them stood against the idea of the Roman papacy and didn't believe that the Pope was the successor of Peter and the head of the church. Augustine wrote in Retractions chapter 20 that the church was going to be built upon Jesus, that Jesus was the rock. Chrysostom, in his commentary on Galatians, wrote that Peter, James, and John held primacy over the disciples. So how would Peter alone be the primary apostle? Cyprian wrote in his On the Unity of the Church chapter 4 that the rest of the apostles were the same as Peter in their power. Origen, in his commentary on Matthew, denied that it was Peter the person that Jesus was going to build his church. Irenaeus, in his book Against Heresies, traces the succession of bishops in Rome to Peter and Paul, not just Peter alone. Cyprian of Carthage and another bishop opposed Pope Stephen I's claim over other bishops. Tertullian, in his prescription against heretics, emphasized that apostolic succession was about adhering to true teachings rather than holding a specific office. He does not acknowledge a singular office residing in the Bishop of Rome. Even at the Council of Nicaea, it recognizes major sees like Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch, but never does it grant universal supremacy to the Bishop of Rome. And at the Council of Chalcedon, it declared that the Bishop of Constantinople holds equal authority to the Bishop of Rome, again challenging this idea of Roman supremacy. One after another, when the early church writers analyze Matthew 16:18, they don't come to the same conclusion that Catholics do today. And like Cyprian, Origen, Cyril, Hilary, Jerome, Ambrose, Augustine, not one of them solidifies this theological idea that Peter or the Pope is the rock that Jesus was going to build his church upon. These men aren't exactly Protestants either. Sometimes in the case, like with Jerome, they contradict himself, like in his letter 15 to Pope Damascus. He would write that the chair of Peter was that which the church is built upon. Later in his letter 146, he would contradict this, saying wherever a bishop is, at Rome, Constantinople, or Alexandria, he is of the same priesthood and the same worth. This directly contradicts the idea of Roman primacy. So no, when you study church history, you don't become Catholic. In fact, you don't even find many of the teachings that Catholics hold dear today as being taught or practiced or explained by many of the early church writers in the first few hundred centuries. Hey, come along with me.
At this point, he tries to sell you his course. I'm going to save you from that. All right, so in this video, he makes like 11 claims, and they're spitfire claims that were very cherry-picked, and they're quick. So I'm going to have to go through each one of these and try to break them down for you, and this is going to be a long-form content, so hopefully you stick around. The early church fathers were not Catholic. That's his first claim. The term Catholic in Greek is katholikos, and I might be mispronouncing that. My linguistic skills are garbage. It was used so many times in the early church to describe the true church of Christ. Catholic means universal. It was the universal church. Some references for this is Saint Ignatius of Antioch, who wrote in 107 AD, and he used the term clearly: wherever Jesus Christ is, there is the Catholic Church. This is the letter to the Smyrnaeans 8. He also wrote, "Let no one do anything of concern to the church without the bishop. Let that be considered a valid Eucharist which is celebrated by the bishop, or by one whom he appoints. It is not lawful to baptize or give communion without the bishop." And that's, again, letter to the Smyrnaeans 8. It debunks the first claim immediately, but all of his other claims are going to kind of go off of this. And again, it's just cherry-picked information and wrongfully interpreted. But let's look and see. It's important to know that St. Ignatius was someone the apostles knew personally, and that he has already affirmed the authority of the bishops. He has affirmed the centrality of the Eucharist and the universal Catholic Church. This clearly disqualifies the notion that the early Christians were not generic, whatever, Protestants is what we would call them now, but like loosely organized believers, okay? So they had a universal church, they had a set of beliefs, and they had doctrine. They were not governed by 33,000 Protestant churches. Claim number 2 is that St. Augustine denied Peter as the rock of the church. This was in Retractions, Book 1, Chapter 20. The claim quote is that Peter called after this rock represented the person of the church which is built upon this rock, but the rock was Christ. Yes, Augustine did interpret the rock in multiple ways, as Christ, Peter's confession, and Peter himself. But he never denied the primacy of the Roman bishop or the Roman see. Some references here is in Sermon 295. Augustine also says, Peter is called the rock when the Lord said to him, upon this rock I will build my church. He meant upon the man he had named Peter. And that is, again, Sermon 295. Here he clearly demonstrates this. In Sermon 147:3, he says, Peter alone among the apostles received the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Surely in a figure he represented the church. Another claim, and the famous line, Rome has spoken, the case is closed. That's Sermon 131:10. Augustine held both and interpretation, not either or. So it was either both and or either or, but he held the both and interpretation. He saw Christ as the ultimate rock, but Peter as the foundational, visible head of the church on earth. And that would be what Catholics believe is, yes, we do not believe that the Pope is Jesus Christ. We don't. But he is the head of the church directed by Jesus Christ and appointed there for a very good reason. And so whenever the claim is that the church was built upon the rock and the rock was not Peter but it was Jesus, the church is built upon Jesus. It is. And we have representation for that. And number 3 is he claimed, or St. Chrysostom claimed, that Peter, James, and John held equal primacy. The citation is the commentary on Galatians 1:1 through 3. The response that I'm going to have for this one is that Chrysostom highlights Peter, James, and John as pillars of the church in the commentation on Galatians, and that's 2 and 9. But he does not deny Peter's unique authority. In fact, Chrysostom frequently elevates Peter's in other homilies. And some references for that is the homily on Matthew 54, Peter, the leader of the choir, the mouth of all the apostles, the head of the apostolic band, the first in the church, the lover of Christ. The next one would be homily 87 on John, and that was Peter was set over the church and entrusted with the care of the world. So even while recognizing the roles of James and John, Chrysostom acknowledges Peter's distinct position of leadership. Claim number 4 is that Cyprian said the apostles were equal in authority. His reference is on the Unity of the Church, chapter 4, and the quote is, assuredly, the rest of the apostles were also the same as Peter, or as was Peter, endowed with a like partnership both of honor and power, but the beginning proceeds from unity. Cyprian does affirm the equality of the apostles in sacramental power, but he also clearly identifies Peter's primacy as source of unity. And the references I have here are a few. Letter 43 to Cornelius, where he says, God is one, and Christ is one, and one is the church, and the chair founded upon Peter by the voice of the Lord. The next one would be Epistle 59 through 14, or 14. Would heretics dare to come to the very seat of Peter whence apostolic faith is derived, and whither no errors can come? Thus Cyprian acknowledges Peter as the principle of unity, even if all apostles share dignity. Claim number 5 is on Origen denying Peter as the rock. Origen does offer a spiritual interpretation that the rock is Christ or Peter's confession, but he never denies Peter's authority or leadership. And that's important to note because, again, it's a misinterpretation or a misunderstanding that just because people would write about Christ being the rock of the church, yes, the church is founded upon Christ. That's the whole point of it, right? Jesus Christ, the Son of God. But the idea is that the Pope or the Apostolic Succession, the Bishop of Rome, is the appointed human to represent the authoritative position, and that's where the centrality comes from. And that keeps it from being like an ungoverned amount of Protestant churches with all these different viewpoints that don't really align with Christ's teaching, because you have your own interpretation of the Bible. And when we have interpretations that date back to when Christ walked the earth. Some quotes on this is homilies on Exodus 5. See what a great foundation of the church is, that most solid of rocks upon which the Lord built the church. The next one is commentary on John 5:3. Peter, upon whom the church of Christ is built, against which the gates of hell shall not prevail. So Origen's view is consistent with the patristic exegesis at the time, and it does have multiple meanings that do not exclude Peter's authority. The 6th claim is that Irenaeus traced Roman succession to both Peter and Paul. Yes, Irenaeus did trace apostolic succession to both Peter and Paul, and that's because they were both martyred in Rome. But he does emphasize Peter's foundational role in this context. And here's a quote for that. Against Heresies 3.2, it is a matter of necessity that every church should agree with this church of Rome on account of its preeminent authority. The preeminent authority, or the Latin word potentior principalitas, is understood as the see of Peter. Even if Paul's role is in founding is acknowledged, we understand the apostles are apostles. That's very simple. By acknowledging the founding and the apostles, we are not still, we're not going against Peter being the founding seat. It was written about. We can acknowledge that and still acknowledge his leadership role. It's like two guys finding a company and one guy being the head of the company while the other guy's like the chief financial officer or something like that. You're still acknowledging the head of the company. Maybe he was founded, but like the reality is Jesus Christ founded it, and then there was apostles under Jesus Christ. Peter just so happens to be the seat of the church. So claim number 7 is about Cyprian and another bishop disclaiming Stephen the First. So understand, before we dive into this, theological debate is really important to understand. There are questions that I will have about the church that I may not fully understand. And I will have a doctrinal understanding from maybe another faith. For me, I come from a Baptist background to occultist and then Kabbalist. And so sometimes I have to relate to those things to kind of understand how things work. So when you're engaging in theological debate, you're not necessarily discrediting or denying something. You're just wondering why something is the way it is. And at the time, they didn't have Google or any resources that was super easy to access. They had letters, and they would engage in conversation through letters and so forth. So Cyprian did have disagreements with Pope Stephen I over doctrinal details, specifically on the issue of rebaptism of heretics. However, this does not negate Cyprian's broader recognition of Roman's primacy, and on the unity of the church, Cyprian states, "Would heretics dare to come to the very seat of Peter whence the apostolic faith is derived, and whither no errors can come?" That's in Epistles 59:14. He also refers to Peter as the foundation of the church and acknowledges Rome's unique position in maintaining unity. Furthermore, even in his disputes with Pope Stephen I, Cyprian did not deny the Bishop of Rome's authority, but rather engaged in theological debate within the existing hierarchical framework of the church. This demonstrates that while theological disagreement existed, they did not undermine the fundamental acknowledgement of Rome's primacy in apostolic succession. Claim number 8, he claims that Tertullian, in 200 AD, in the Prescriptions Against Heretics, chapter 32, emphasizes that apostolic succession is about adhering to true teachings rather than holding a specific office. And then he puts in red letters that he does not acknowledge a singular authority residing in the Bishop of Rome. So Tertullian strongly affirms apostolic succession and ecclesiastical authority. In the Da Prescriptione Hereticorum, or the Prescription of Heretics, he uses the apostolic succession not merely as adherence to true teaching, but as a criterion of ecclesiastical authority, specifically episcopal lineage from the apostles. And here's some quotes from that. Chapter 32, he says, "Let them, the heretics, produce the original records of their church." Who does, well, wait. Anyways, "Let them unfold the roll of their bishops, running down in due succession from the beginning in such a manner that their first bishop shall be able to show for his ordainer and predecessor some of the apostles or of apostolic men." So wait a minute. He says, let them, talking about the heretics, produce the original records of their churches. Who? You get what I'm saying here. You get what I'm saying here. Here he is claiming that apostolic succession is historical, traceable, and visible. It resides in the episcopate, the office of the bishop. Tertullian's argument is ecclesiological. It's not doctrinal. And I think it's important to understand the difference here. So he's not merely asserting adherence to correct doctrine. He's arguing that the validity of the doctrine depends on the authority of the church that teaches it, and that this authority is rooted in apostolic succession. The quote is from chapter 21, same book. "From this, therefore, do we draw upon our rule, since the Lord Jesus Christ sent the apostles to preach. No others ought to be received as preachers than those whom Christ appointed. For no man knows the Father save the Son, and he to whomsoever the Son shall reveal him. Nor does the Son seem to have revealed to him any other than the apostles, whom he sent to preach him. If any be heretics, they cannot be true Christians, because it is not from Christ that they get their teaching. If it's from heretics or heresy, then they can't be true teachers because they didn't get their teachings from Christ. And if we look at heresies and how does heresies form, well, schisms are a heresy, and I mean, this alone is saying that like the Protestant faith movement in these many different belief systems are heresy and they don't get their true teachings from Christ. It's funny how he uses this to make a claim, but the claim itself is against his claim. And even before his Martinus phase, Tertullian acknowledges Rome's unique authority among the apostolic churches. Again, another quote, chapter 36, run over the apostolic churches, in which the very thrones of the apostles are still preeminent in their places, in which their own authentic writing are read, echoing the voice and representing the face of each of them. In Achaia near you, or is Achaia near you, you have Corinth. If you are not from Macedonia, you are a Philippi or a Thessalonica. If you cannot go to Asia, you have Ephesus. But if you are near Italy, you have Rome, where authority is over at hand for us. But if you are near Italy, you have Rome, where authority is over at hand for us. In this, he identifies that Rome is the center of ecclesial authority, and he elevates the Roman Church here. So he's cherry picking, and this is what he does with all of this stuff, but he's cherry picking, and he's misrepresenting his intent. His claims are that Tertullian says apostolic succession is just doctrinal, and that's wrong because Tertullian explicitly says succession is visible, historical, and episcopal. He also claims that he does not affirm the Roman authority, as in Tertullian does not affirm it. That's false. He refers to Rome as the source of ecclesial authority. He also claims that apostolic succession doesn't involve offices from Tertullian, and that's refuted because the bishop is central to succession. Without it, there is no valid preaching, and that's what we've already talked about, cherry picking. And just as a claim, if Tertullian says succession must be in due order from the apostles, how can any Protestant denomination founded after the 16th century or later claim that? And if that's the case, then they're heretics, right? And then he says heretics do not have Christ's teaching. Why would Tertullian say that authority is at hand for us in Rome if all churches are equal in authority? So he claims the Council of Nicaea never grants universal authority to the Bishop of Rome, but he does acknowledge the sees, or the Council acknowledges the sees. And yes, the Council of Nicaea does acknowledge the major sees, such as Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch. However, historical documentation shows the implicit recognition of Rome's primary authority, notably through the Council's reference to the Bishop of Rome established position. And you can look at the historical records of the Council of Nicaea, Canon 6, for this. In Claim 10, he talks about the Council of Chalcedon on Constantinople's equality on Rome. Chalcedon elevated Constantinople's honor due to its imperial status. This was strictly political. It was not a spiritual primacy, which is what we see as the Pope or the Bishop of Rome. It's a spiritual primacy set forth by Jesus Christ. Canon 28 of the Council of Chalcedon granted Constantinople's equal privileges to Rome, but this was based on the city's political standing, not theological supremacy. Pope Leo the Great rejected Canon 28, affirming in his letter 106 to Emperor Marcion, the city of Rome was set above the rest, not by decisions of the councils, but by the voice of the Lord in the gospel. Furthermore, in letter 105 to the Empress Pulcheria, he stated, the Church of Rome stands first in the dignity conferred upon by the Lord himself. Thus, Rome's primacy was always understood as divinely instituted rather than politically assigned, and that distinguishes it from Constantinople's status. His final claim is that Jerome contradicted himself between letters 15 and 146, and talking about the papacy of Rome, or the primacy, I guess. So, yes, Jerome recognized Rome's unique primacy in the patrine's office. In letter 15 to Pope Damasus, he explicitly affirms, I follow no leader but Christ, and join in communion with none but your blessedness, that is, with the chair of Peter. I know that this is the rock on which the church is built, and that was letter 15:2. However, in letter 146, Jerome emphasizes the sacramental equality of all bishops, and he states, wherever a bishop is, whether at Rome or at Eugabuum, I'm mispronouncing that, I'm sure, or at Constantinople or at Regium, he is of the same priesthood and of the same dignity. That's letter 146:1. This does not contradict his earlier position, but it does clarify it. And it clarifies that while bishops share in the sacramental dignity of episcopacy, Rome retains the unique primacy of the See of Peter. Jerome's writings show a nuanced understanding of episcopal authority, recognizing both the unity of the bishops and the distinct leadership of the Roman See in maintaining doctrinal consistency and apostolic succession. And we still believe this, like bishops hold that priesthood. Bishops can do these sacraments, but the See of Peter, the Bishop of Rome, that seat, the Pope, is the authoritative position that maintains the consistency of the doctrine. A little theological clarification is that the Church's teachings on Peter's primacy is grounded in biblical exegesis, and that's based on Matthew 16:18. Early Church Fathers' consistent acknowledgement and historical continuity, while various Church Fathers explored theological metaphors and sometimes disagreed on secondary points, their consensus still affirmed the unique role of Peter and the successors of Rome. And you can look in the Catholic Catechism of the Church, CCC 881 and 882, Vatican I, Pastor Aeternus, and Vatican II, Lumen Gentium. Each of these claims made by this Protestant speaker are cherry-picked and they misrepresent the Church in general. For an ex-Catholic, it's kind of shocking to see, but it's not at the same time. Usually this comes from a place of hate or emotional issues that's dealt with the Church from like an early age. And just in general, I have the same issue with baptism. Not baptism, but Baptist faith. I was raised Baptist, and I have a bit of sourness towards the Baptist faith because of the things I've seen in the Baptist church. It doesn't mean Baptist people are bad. There's plenty of really good Baptist people out there. But when you are soured from something, from negative experiences, especially at a young age, it makes you want to go against it, right? And though I don't do that with Baptists, I will debunk claims made, of course, by Protestants. I'm not going to actively attack Baptists. I have some really wonderful people that I love who are Baptist. One of the greatest mentors I can think of is a preacher or a pastor at a Baptist church, and I have the utmost love for him. He's an amazing person, and even though he's not Catholic and he probably has misunderstandings of the Catholic faith, I think he's a great person. But when you cherry pick documents and you are exploring these misrepresentations and you're doing this in order to sell a course for 10 grand to people, it's bad. That's a bad thing. So he's quoting things without full context. And that's not good. But if you look at a full reading of the sources, they demonstrate that the early church was Catholic and the church fathers were Catholic. That's the term they used. It's a Greek word. And they acknowledge the primacy of Rome, the papal authority. The primacy of Peter was not a later invention, but an apostolic truth rooted in both scripture and tradition. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, and share. Make sure you turn your notifications on. And if any of this helped you understand your faith more deeply, please let me know. I'm really curious on what you would like to see on this channel, if you want to see more of these debunking videos, or if there was something I said in this video that maybe you want more clarification on or you disagree with, let me know. I respond to pretty much everything as long as it's not like schizo posting or just blatant attacks. If you're a schizo poster, I won't acknowledge it because it's just ridiculous, but that's just what it is. Either way, thanks for watching Tradition and Truth. God bless, and I hope you have a wonderful day.